This is an introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, and specifically the philosophical aspects of the Bhagavad Gita, just looking at roughly the first half of the text here in this lecture video. Now, before we get into the Bhagavad Gita, we have to understand the context of the Bhagavad Gita. So, the Bhagavad Gita comes from actually the Vedas. So, the Vedas are the oldest religious texts in the world. They are the foundational religious texts of Hinduism, the most prominent religion practiced in India. Now, of the Vedas, there is actually a subset of the Vedas called the Upanishads, which contains some of the philosophical elements of the Vedas, and out of the Upanishads is influenced the Bhagavad Gita. So some other aspects of Hinduism we should understand are the idea that there is one God, which is everything, which is called Brahman. Now, Brahman actually manifests itself in various ways. So, Hinduism is often considered to be a polytheistic religion and that there are many gods. And this is true, there are many gods, but there are many gods which are all manifestations of one God, the one true thing that is everything, Brahman. Now, the main gods are Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Now, in Hinduism, there's this idea of reincarnation. So, everyone has lived a previous life, or, human manifested life, and based on their karma, right, their actions, the dharma of their actions, what they do, to what extent their actions are morally right, based on what is true, that influences then their rebirth into the next life. So, this cyclic existence is known as samsara. Now, the social and political context then of and foundation really of the Hindu religion is known as the caste system. So the caste system is where you have Brahmins, warriors, Vaisyas, Sudras, and untouchables. So the best class in society in the caste system is the Brahmins, and they are the priests. The next best class is warriors. The third best class is the Vaisyas, which are merchants and farmers. The fourth best are Sudras, servants and laborers. And then the worst, which are in a way outside even the caste system, are the untouchables. Now, you were actually born into the caste system by birth. So if your parent was a Brahmin, you were born in, as a part of the Brahmin class. If your family is part of the warrior class, you're born into the warrior class. But that depends on actually how good you were in your previous life. So if you manifested good dharma, right, or as I should say, good karma, right, you practiced dharma, then perhaps if you were a Vaisya, a merchant or a farmer in a previous life, then as due to good karma, you could be reborn as, let's say, a warrior or a Brahmin. And of course, if you were a bad person, you could be born into a lower caste. So you actually do move throughout the caste system, but not in this life, right? It all depends on what you do in this life that affects the future lives. Now, there is some sense of actually liberation from samsara. This is known as moksha. And this is where one ends their life as a Brahmin. Well, I should say ends their life as a Brahmin successfully, right? Who practice good karma. Now, let's get into the meaning and purpose of the Bhagavad Gita. So in the Bhagavad Gita, there are two main characters. Arjuna, who is a fierce warrior, the best warrior that is known in the land, and then Krishna. And what happens is, there's about to be a big battle. And in this battle, there's going to be a fight where actually on the opposing side, some of Arjuna's family, his kin, right, people he knows, friends, family, and so on, are on the other side. And before this battle happens, he asks Krishna to take him out in his chariot to the middle of the battlefield. Doing so, he looks out and he's distraught at the prospect, the fact that he is supposed to go and kill the enemy, which includes, again, his family and friends, right? His kin. Now, this ends up really provoking the entire context of the Bhagavad Gita, because here is Arjuna, who is thinking about the fact that, why am I in this situation, right? I'm supposed to go and fight my friends and family. Why would I want to do this at all? This provokes some questions about what's the point of living in society, or living at all, if it is to go and commit, terrible things that would make us sad. So do we live for the sake of others? Is that why we do what we do? Is that what makes our actions good? Is that it is for others, right? Completely altruistic, and whatever that may be. Is it for the sake of pleasure? Well, it doesn't seem like there'd be much pleasure in going and killing your kin. Or is it for some other joy in life besides pleasure, right? So these are some questions about meaning in life and about purpose in life and what the good life is, right? A basic philosophical question. What is the good life? What is it one should do that makes it worth living at all? And what does it mean then to maybe flourish, right, in that life? Now, with Arjuna being distraught, the Bhagavad Gita is about Krishna confronting and consoling and teaching, right, in this moment of this existential crisis, really, of Arjuna. Now, there's a basic moral dilemma that this text is about, right? On the one hand, it's intuitively wrong to kill family, friends, and compatriots, right? We feel, I think, if we were asked, hey, you need to go kill your family, right? We would think there's something wrong about that, right? Even if, let's say, okay, maybe instead of killing, we could think of this as like, you need to turn in your father for theft, right? So your father stole something. Even if we know, oh yeah, okay, my father did feel something, it still feels a bit wrong, right? Like, why am I put in this situation where I have to do this? And so there's a dilemma. On the one hand, it seems intuitively right to not kill for Arjuna his family and friends and compatriots, right? That he should lay down his arms and not fight. And yet, on the other hand, it's the right thing to do. It's his duty as a member of the warrior class to protect, right, his nation against enemies, even if those enemies may be his family, friends, and former compatriots. So we can look at here the slippery slope that Arjuna actually paints. So this is going to be in the first chapter, verse 39. So Arjuna says, how could we not have the wisdom to run away from this evil thing, since we can see that to destroy the whole family is a terrible crime? If our family is destroyed, then the timeless traditional laws of the family will die too. If traditional law dies, then chaos will overwhelm the entire family. If the family is overwhelmed by chaos, then the women of the family will be corrupted, and when the women are corrupted, Krishna, all social order will collapse, right? And we can think of this as, okay, let's say we have a friend at work, right? And we notice our friend is stealing from the company or something like that, right? So this is maybe a matter of like business ethics or stealing from others, right? And on the one hand, you need solidarity among workers. You need a certain kind of trust to successfully work together. But on the other hand, well, this person is doing something wrong and I should go and turn them in. By doing so, you might be doing the right thing, but you could potentially lead to worsening consequences if you end up breaking up a kind of fabric of trust among each other, right? The same thing is with the family as well, right? If you have to go and turn your father in. So Arjuna, continuing here, he says, this collapse drags the family and those who destroy it down into hell, and their ancestors fall with them, since the offerings of rice and water will no longer be given. The crimes of those who destroy the family cause the social order to collapse. They undermine the changing laws of caste duty and family duty. Krishna, we have been taught that a place in hell is saved for men who undermine family duty. This is our tradition. No, we are intent on committing a great evil here, driven as we are by greed for a kingdom and for pleasures, to kill our own kinsmen. If Dhritarashtra's men with all their weapons were to kill me here, right, the enemies on the other side, as I am, unarmed and unresisting, that would bring me greater peace. So it seems better to not kill, right, your family and friends on the other side, even if they are the enemy. Saying these things in the midst of a war, Arjuna sank down into his chariot seat. He dropped his bow and arrows. His mind was tormented by grief. Right, so the moral dilemma here: follow caste duty and kill kin, or violate caste duty. So here we have some questions about the foundations of morality. Now, the argument in the Bhagavad Gita is that one should do what is right because it is right and for no other reason. It's a kind of deontological argument that the rightness of an action stems from the fact that it is right in itself, right? And, not because of consequences, not because it makes us happy, not because it keeps social order. Now, this might seem ridiculous, right? This idea that, well, the action is right because it's right in and of itself. It's just a good thing to do. Krishna gives some arguments as to why this is the case. So the first one is that encounters with the world induce sensations which are impermanent, but you are permanent. Right? So there's this idea of, again, reincarnation. Or if you think, right, you have a soul and the soul lives on after you die. Well, this idea of this feeling sad or distraught that you have to go and kill your family members, right? These are feelings and these are desires. Feelings and desires are impermanent. They're worldly material things. How could these impermanent things matter in the grand scheme of things, right? They can't be the source of rightness. Only those things which are permanent can be the source of rightness. So we can't rely on our feelings and desires to determine what is the right thing to do. Now, if we did rely, or try to rely on feelings and desires, then the origins of all things would be inaccessible to us. Dharma, so what is true or what is morally right, is beyond our understanding because it is permanent. And only that which is permanent is established by Brahman. Only that established by Brahman is Dharma. Finally, following duty is remaining actually within the self. So here we're actually getting in this connection between the self and Brahman. So the self, right? Following duty is remaining within the self. The self, known as Atman in the Sanskrit, is also actually Brahman. So the self, yourself, not the worldly self, your skin, your feelings, your desires, your memories, those are not your real self. But your real self is Atman, the same as Brahman. That which is permanent. That which gives rise to everything. So Dharma, moral rightness, right? Right actions are practiced by actually turning away from the worldly self and instead focusing on the true self, the Atman. So Krishna says, when a man approaches sensual objects with his own senses, detached from desire and anger, that is, when his senses are controlled by his Atman, then he is in control of himself and he finds peace. Now, how do we actually practice Dharma, right? That which is right. On the one hand, we have followers of Samkhya. Followers of Samkhya argue that Dharma, moral rightness, is attained by means of the yoga knowledge, so it's about obtaining wisdom. Followers of Yoga, on the other hand, argue that Dharma is attained by means of the yoga of action, right? So instead of knowing everything that's right, it's about doing right actions. Now, the idea in the Bhagavad Gita is actually that it requires both. So it's a requirement that all of us actually have to act due to forces of nature, right? So even though our true self might be the Atman, which is something that lives on beyond the material, worldly self, we're still subject to the forces of nature, one, material nature, and two, the nature of Brahman. However, whoever controls their senses with their minds engages in the yoga of action, being unattached. And this is why it requires both what the followers of Samkhya and the followers of Yoga argue. On the one hand, right knowledge, and on the other hand, right action. You can't have one without the other. You have to control your senses. You do so with the requisite knowledge, and yet you can only act on that requisite knowledge by training yourself through yoga. Now, to do so, in gaining this knowledge, by relying on the fact that we are caused by nature, we are not the source of our own actions, right? Because this idea that we are an I separate from everything else, this is an illusion, right? Really, again, our real self is permanent. It is Atman, the same as Brahman, that which is permanent. Brahman it makes everything possible, and in this sense is therefore everything. So no single person actually is the cause of actions. So Krishna says all our actions are performed at all times as a result of the three conditions of nature. So the three conditions of nature are sattva, being or goodness, rajas, passion, and ramas, darkness. So continuing here, Krishna says, the man whose self is deluded because of his egotism thinks, I am the actor. But when he truly understands the difference between action and the conditions of nature, then, he says to Arjuna, he thinks these conditions arise from other conditions, and he is not attached to them. So some of the things that we have to learn, right, through Samkhya, is that we are not actually the cause. It is not, Arjuna placed in the battlefield. It's not a result of him that he has to go and fight. And it is not up to him whether he does fight or not fight. And there's actually some solace one can take in this, right? You are not the cause of this war, and you are not the cause of the fact that you have to go and kill your family members in battle. It's due to the way things you are. It is due to forces that are outside your control. Then you act on that. Now, of course, that takes practice, which is why this has to become habitual over time. You have to work on it through means of yoga action. Now, in acting on this knowledge, eventually the goal, of course, is to achieve moksha, liberation from the cycle of reincarnation, of samsara. Now, the question is, how does one achieve then this serenity of the yogin, the one who is at peace with the fact that they are not the source of their own actions? Now, we've already said this requires knowledge and action, right? Combining that of Samkhya and yoga. How, though? Well, Krishna says, one is said to be advanced in yoga when one has renounced all personal intention and when one is no longer attached to sense objects and actions. So what one has to begin to do is to get rid of this idea that they are responsible for their actions and what they do. They have to stop thinking of themselves as distinct from others and think about how they are related to everything else. Now, of course, again, this requires the training of the mind. So we have this kind of dialectic almost that's going on here, where at one and the same time, the self is both the means and the obstacle of moksha. It is only through the self, though the Atman, the real permanent self, that one can achieve liberation, that one can do what is right. And yet, on the other hand, it is also the self that corrupts this, that obfuscates the achievement of moksha, because then we become deluded thinking, well, I need to do what is in my best interest, right? We become thinking about ourselves in my best interest as an individual. And instead, what is in my best interest is in the best interest of all. So a yogin regards all as the same. A friend, an ally, a foreigner, a bystander, a neutral party, an enemy, and a kinsman. All are products of Brahman, the same as me. All are one. When we begin to think this way, we no longer fret over our actions and what might, the consequences which might result from them, as long as we do the right thing. Right? So this is, of course, a question. Well, how do we know we're doing the right thing? Well, of course, one begins by abandoning all desires that arise from the self. Once one does this, right, they get rid of self-interest, you focus on Brahman. So supreme joy is said to come to the yogin whose mind is at peace, who has merged with Brahman. As Krishna says, having yoked himself by means of yoga, so I've gotten rid of the self-interest by means of yoga, he sees the self that dwells in all beings and all beings within the self. Indeed, he sees the same in all things. Now, of course, again, the mind is restless. How is this actually possible, right? This seems all good, in theory. Seems like a nice utopian idea that we can just think of ourselves as selfless. How is this actually possible? Well, Krishna admits, this is really difficult. Which is why you can't just think about it, right? We can't just read these texts and think about it. We have to act on them. So only with rigorous practice and dispassion can we restrain the mind. And furthermore, good news. Krishna says merely desiring to know yoga sets one on the path. Right? So we might want to, how do we get the ball rolling? How do I know I'm actually doing things right, going in the right direction? Merely desiring to know, right? Just wanting to do the right thing doesn't guarantee you do the right thing, but it sets one on the path to doing the right thing.